She loved taking pictures of small things. The coffee cup with the lipstick crescent. The way late light pooled on the living room rug. A new dress hanging like a promise on the back of a chair. It was how she showed me her day without the obligation of telling it. Lately, those pictures had begun to land in my inbox with a frequency that felt like both habit and courtesy. Look at this, and then a photo, bright and intimate. I used to answer with the easy compliment of a man who liked to be included. Then the photos began to have an edge. One Tuesday she sent a picture of the jacket she'd bought on impulse. The fabric caught the light and looked expensive. The hanger bent slightly under the weight. I swiped because that's what you do. Admire, reply, move on. My thumb paused on the glossy image when something in the sleeve caught a sliver of light, an unintended mirror, the polished chrome of the coat rack reflecting the room. For a second I didn't register what I was seeing. Then the reflection sharpened into the outline of a face behind her shoulder, half hidden. A suggestion of someone standing too close. Denial is generous. I told myself reflections lie. That light tricks lenses into making strangers where none exist. I saved the photo anyway, an impulse I couldn't explain as anything but the small need for proof. The next week she sent another. Her back to the camera, the curve of her neck bare, a city sunset behind. In the glass of the window was a figure, this time more clearly defined, his profile catching the last light. He was looking at her, not at the sunset, and in the way heads incline there was that familiar, private interest that belongs to people who spend time learning a face. I began to keep the photos in a folder named Proofs like a man who collects receipts. They were small and clever. She had no idea that the very thing she'd used to stage her life, photography, would betray the staging. I went back through old images too. Screenshots from months earlier, a selfie with a drink in hand, a photograph of a dinner plate she had captioned date night. In the corner of one, reflected in the wine glass, was a sleeve with a cuff I recognized from a shirt she'd once folded into a laundry pile, and told me had been for someone at the office. Each reflection was a breadcrumb, a wrist, a jawline, the way a shoulder sat near her as if it had taken up permanent residence. I did not confront her that day. There is a peculiar way men imagine confrontations, shouting, slamming doors, cinematic collapses. And there is the actual thing, which is quieter and more surgical. I made coffee and went to work and kept the folder on my phone like a small burning coal. That evening she asked if I wanted to go out. I said no. She frowned but shrugged it off. The phone between us hummed with ordinary things. The news, the weather. And beneath it all the weight of what I had seen pulsed like a steady engine. Instead of anger, I chose method. Cold revenge is not about spectacle. It's about returning temperature to a life someone has been allowed to warm with their own secrets. I started by reclaiming small domestic things she'd come to take for granted. I stopped pre-cleaning the house before she came home. I left dishes where she left them. I stopped being the man who anticipated every need. I let needs sit, unassuaged, so she could feel the vacuum she had been filling elsewhere. But there was one thing I wanted that was precise and a little cruel. I wanted the evidence rearranged so that she would see herself the way she appeared to me, caught, mirrored, exposed by the light she thought was companionable. The next weekend I borrowed a friend's camera under the pretext of wanting better photos for a profile. I invited her to dinner and suggested we take a few pictures afterward because the restaurant had the kind of old mirrors my grandmother loved. She agreed. Her smile when a camera was offered was easy and unguarded. The restaurant's mirrored wall did most of the work. We took a few Polaroids that popped like old coins. I laughed at something she said. And in the mirror behind us her profile flashed with the angle of someone leaning into the frame, his shoulder close to hers, his head turned as if to catch a word. She stopped laughing for a second and didn't know why. I did. After the photos were developed I suggested we look at them together the way people used to look at albums. She hesitated but sat. The first picture made her smile. Then the second, and the third, and then she saw it in the reflections. The same jaw she thought was cleverly absent in her earlier shots, the same cuff, the same private way his face angled toward her. Her face drained color as if the images had drawn the warmth out. For a moment she looked like someone who'd been shown an unedited scene of herself and found the edits cruel. She tried to laugh it off, then reached to swipe the photo from my hands. I kept it folded, a small relic of truth. You always liked the light here, I said, calm as an inventory clerk. What is that? She asked, the words thin. Reflections, I said. They tell the truth sometimes. She stammered, explanations, then denials. The usual choreography. It happened once, it was nothing, he was a friend. Her voice had the worn edges of someone inventing shelter out of sentences. I could have let the Polaroid become the end. Instead, I wanted the exposure to be more than a single moment. I wanted her to feel the slow thaw of the life she'd chilled. So I made other small arrangements. I returned texts late and with polite distance. I stopped answering with the endearments she'd grown used to. I rearranged our shared calendar. Movie night vanished, the laundry day moved. I began to make plans without her input. Dinners with friends, a weekend trip booked to a place she'd never liked. Each omission was a small correction to the ledger. Attention reclaimed for the person who had been giving it away without consent. Word spread quietly, too, among mutual friends who had noticed her new brightness and asked with the curious kindness of people who only see certain angles. I did not stage confrontations or scenes. I allowed them to notice in the way you notice a streetlight extinguished. She felt the absence in the way people feel a missing limb. Not immediately, but as an oddness in everyday motions. She began to ask questions, sharp, fearful ones, and I answered with pieces rather than exclamations until the pattern completed itself without me having to shout it. In time she asked to talk. We sat at the table where we'd eaten 1,000 small dinners and she offered the rehearsed truths. Loneliness, attention, an accident of closeness. She wanted to be forgiven, or at least understood. I listened because listening is how you decide whether to stay. Her words were true in parts, ragged with omissions and the fatigue of someone who had been living in 2 lightings at once. I left the Polaroids in a drawer and moved out a month later. There was no dramatic reveal, no public humiliation, just a slow, practical unweaving. Boxes, signatures, the polite logistics of endings. The folder of photos stayed on my phone for a while like a map I consulted now and then, not to punish, but to remember the exact moment the mirror had given him away.